and they're into the stretch. Medina Spirit fights on the outside. Midnight Bourbon. Bauer is rolling up to them. Coming by the 8 pole. It is now Bauer storming to the front, taking over from Midnight Bourbon. Medina Spirit has dropped back. Keep Me in Mind is fourth. Bauer and Flavien Prat win the Preakness, pulling away by 4 on the wire.
Welcome back to Racing Rundown. On today's video, we're going to be previewing the 2021 Belmont Stakes, the final leg of the 2021 Triple Crown. Very happy to be back at a mile and a half of the Belmont. Last year's Belmont didn't feel right. I'm sure for anyone, it's really nice to be able to get back to a normal Belmont Stakes. We got 8 horses here, rather light on horses. This is one of the shorter fields in recent memory in the Belmont, but it's a field of 5 really strong horses and then 3 horses, whatever you make of them is how you can describe the rest of the field, but 5 really strong contenders in here. And you can make a case for a couple of the horses underneath that, but as usual, we're going to get into all the horses, all 8 of them, and we're going to start off with the number 1 horse, Bourbonic, the winner of the Wood Memorial, who is going to get, I think, a fair amount of wise guy money because he is one of 3 Todd Pletcher horses in the race, and we're going to say this term a lot throughout this video. He is a Pletcher plotter, and in the Belmont, Todd Pletcher runs great over the course of his career, and Bourbonic definitely has a chance to add to that legacy in here. There are a couple things against him, though. Number 1 thing is the Wood Memorial that he won was a atrocious race. You go back and you look at that field. That field has accomplished next to nothing. There's only 1 horse in there that I even can show a modicum of respect for, and that's Weyburn, and that's because he hasn't run since the Wood Memorial. So, we'll see how he does, but for the most part, that was a very awful Wood Memorial, and Bourbonic didn't really run great in the Kentucky Derby. He did beat horses. It was a conversation before the race of he wasn't going to win. He wasn't really going to run good. How many horses was he going to beat? He ran probably about as good as you could have expected him to run if you were thinking about him logically. And he did win the Wood Memorial. He does have a run over the surface at Belmont. He is a typical New York horse, so that is going to be attractive to some people. I know that there are some people that do like him in here underneath at a price, but he's not for me because the Wood Memorial was just that bad, and I prefer other horses in here at a price.
And I'm basically in the same boat. Bourbonic's not a bad horse at all, and he has a very nice win, but Jack already mentioned kind of what the entailments of that race were, as in there was not a single graded stakes level horse really in that field, despite there being graded stakes winners. None of them have come back to do anything, and none of them really good when they were winning those graded stakes. So Derby kind of backed that up, never really had any trouble. I will say I think the distance is going to, really suit him. He's got the pedigree and the physical build for it. You look at his progression throughout his career, he's only gotten better the longer the distances have gotten, minus that Derby, which was, of course, a very tough field. Another thing was closers weren't coming on too well at the end of the Kentucky Derby, as I imagine most listening already know. So that's another excuse for him from that last start. But otherwise, probably just overmatched, especially with some of the quality in the favorites in this year's Belmont Stakes.
And the number 2 horse is the morning line favorite and the likely post-time favorite for this race, Essential Quality. Before the Kentucky Derby, he had done nothing wrong in his career, 5 for 5, including a win in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile from last year, and he carried that form up through to the Kentucky Derby, but unfortunately for him, he was not able to get past the top 3 in that Kentucky Derby toward the end of the race. He's probably going to be elevated to 3rd place because of the impending disqualification of Medina Spirit, but as of now, 4th place finisher in the Kentucky Derby. The one thing that is going for him is he was very wide, and people who like to use metrics talking about how far horses ran in races like the Kentucky Derby will definitely point to that he ran a very good race in the Kentucky Derby. You certainly can't take that away from him. He runs his race every single time, and I think it would be foolish in this race to leave him out, and I'm not going to leave him out. He is going to be my top pick in here, just because I feel like it's right to go with the favorite in here. I haven't gone with the favorite in a Triple Crown race since last year's Kentucky Derby, and this is the race against the kind of field where it makes sense to go with Essential Quality. He has all the makings of a horse who can win the Belmont. He's obviously by Tappet, and we know that Tappet horses, especially as of late, have done really, really well in the Belmont. Distance absolutely suits him, and his talent as a racehorse shows that he is going to run a good race in the Belmont.
Absolutely. And if you've heard the connections comments about this horse, they've been saying for a long time, since when he was first starting getting going as a 2-year-old, that the Belmont was the race they envisioned for him. And obviously they imagined that the Kentucky Derby and potentially the Preakness would follow that. Well, he got his first Wish the Derby, and he ran such a good race there despite losing all that ground. It was different, though, for him to not, making ground up at the end of the race on Medina Spirit and Mandaloun and Hot Rod Charlie, because if you go back to races, especially last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile, where he just mowed down so many horses in the stretch after coming from well off that quick pace, it was just completely a 180 from what we'd seen from him before. That being said, we know the talent he has. He won his first 5 career races, the 2-year-old champ. He's beaten good horses in every single race, and he had some excuses in the Derby. So Essential Quality is a very talented racehorse. I picked him in the Derby, and I'm also going to be going with Jack as well on Essential Quality, because he's just a very talented horse, and I think this is, like the Connection Stake, I think this is kind of the race for him for his career, really.
And now we're going to move on to the number 3 horse in this race, the Preakness winner, Bauer, a horse who I have a really soft spot for. I did pick him in the Preakness Stakes, but unfortunately, even though I really do like Bauer and would love to see him win the Belmont, I don't see it in the cards for him. Bauer has a pedigree that is very iffy toward the Belmont, and I've seen this comparison made by a few people, and I'm going to steal that comparison and make it on here. And that is a comparison to War of Will, the 2019 winner. These horses are both very similar. War of Will had a very turfy pedigree. Bauer has a very turfy pedigree. War of Will ran horrible in the Belmont. I don't really see a reason that Bauer is going to be able to win the Belmont. Nothing really says in that pedigree that he wants to go this far. I think that the one positive you could say about him is he is going to be coming from mid in this race, so if he sits the Preakness trip, theoretically you would think he would run good, but I just don't think he's going to get the distance. So he's also going to be bet way too much for me. The Preakness was a perfect price for him. He won the Preakness. Everybody knows he's good now, so the money's going to roll in on him. I unfortunately have to get off Bauer for the Belmont.
And I'm also going to be against Bauer in here. Really like the War of Will comparison. And really, I feel like you could find quite a few horses that do fit that billing of a really nice Preakness winner, but probably not good enough to turn around in 3 weeks and get a 1.5 mile distance more than anything for this horse, because you look at his pedigree, very much closer to a miler pedigree, especially on the grass, I might add. So he's already, outrun his pedigree surface-wise, but I don't think he'll be able to do it distance-wise, because just doesn't seem like that type of horse. But he's a talented racehorse. Don't want to take that away from him. I just think in these circumstances against some really, really talented horses, a lot of horses that were highly regarded heading into the Kentucky Derby, I just don't really know how he's going to hang in there. Because really, to me, it seemed that, I know the trainer, Michael McCarthy, great horseman, really wanted this horse to run in the Kentucky Derby, so because he thought he had a chance. But the owners, which you don't really hear about owners being passive on big races, they said, we think the Derby might be too tough. Let's wait for the Preakness, thin out the bunch, and tackle that weaker group, which they did successfully. But now they get those tough top horses from the Kentucky Derby, and I just don't know, because listen, you go back to that Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year and the Bluegrass from this spring. Those were the only times he's had really crossovers with other horses in this field at this point in his career. Those were 2 distant losses to Essential Quality, and one that also included Hot Rod Charlie. And sure, he didn't really get favorable setups or trips in both of those races, but at the end of the day, beating a combined almost 12 lengths in those 2 races. So I think that is just enough to show you. And Flavian Pratt, I might add, the rider, also is hopping off of him to ride Hot Rod Charlie. So I think you add all those up, it just doesn't seem like a lot of positives for the Preakness winner heading into the Belmont Stakes.
And now we're going to move on to the number 4 horse in this race, and that is Hot Rod Charlie, the 3rd place finisher of this year's Kentucky Derby. And Hot Rod Charlie is a horse who has really figured it out since his early struggles in his career. Doug O'Neill horses tend to do that, especially when he has good horses, and that's exactly what Hot Rod Charlie has done. 1 win this year, that was in the Louisiana Derby. Very good 3rd place finish in the Kentucky Derby. We talked about it in our Derby recap. There was a little bit of trouble for him in the race. It wasn't enough to say that he would have won, but had he gotten a Mandaloun type trip, he maybe would have been able to finish second. And you could say there's a world of hypotheticals if X horse got X trip in the Kentucky Derby that I don't really feel like diving into, because it's a bunch of psychobabble. But aside from that, really, really consistent horse. He's a fighter too. Very narrow loss to Medina Spirit, the Kentucky Derby winner, and the Bob Lewis, and that was a race where he ran it really, really good that day. His Breeders' Cup Juvenile his Breeders' Cup Juvenile run, was spectacular. Second place behind Essential Quality. I think he's going to run really well. I will be using him underneath in this race, but I don't think he can beat Essential Quality because the Breeders' Cup, when they both had the kind of setup that they probably wanted to have in that race, Hot Rod Charlie was able to, or Essential Quality was able to finish ahead of Hot Rod Charlie. I know that Hot Rod Charlie beat Essential Quality in the Kentucky Derby technically, but Essential Quality didn't have the kind of trip that he would have wanted, and I think Essential Quality is going to get the kind of trip that he can finish in front of Hot Rod Charlie with. So I'm using him in here, but I'm not going to pick Hot Rod Charlie to win.
And I think that's totally fair. For me, with Hot Rod Charlie, he was one of those favorites that I originally, throughout these past few weeks, I thought, I'm really going to heavily consider him. But looking at how this race is likely going to set up, the setup's not what I think is going to beat him. But I just do have some doubts about him getting that mile and a half distance. He's a very nice horse. He ran super great in the Kentucky Derby, where I think a lot of people have not really realized he did have traffic trouble in that Kentucky Derby. Wasn't a perfect trip, and he still was only beaten a length, finishing third in that spot. But you watch the gallop out from that, which is, I'd say, a pretty fair indication of how a horse is going to handle going a bit longer. And he looked pretty done. So I think, sure, he can probably get up to a mile and a quarter, but you're adding a whole other 2 furlongs onto this race. And that's a huge jump for all these horses. And I just don't know if that's something he'll be able to do. Unless, I think the one thing for Hot Rod Charlie that could put him over the top here and maybe give him a fighting chance to win it, is if he's able to outbreak Essential Quality, crossover, be in front of Essential Quality, and then either Rock Your World can be in front of him or be running head-to-head with him second, and they set a slow pace. But I think unless Hot Rod Charlie is able to walk the dog on the front end or be very, very close to the lead and go very, very slow, 50 seconds for a half mile kind of slow, I think that's really the only way he'll have a chance to win this one.
And the next horse that we're going to move on to is the big wild card, the Japanese import France Godiina, coming out of a 7th place finish in the Preakness, where he did not run how anybody thought he was going to. Looked like he was going to be coming from very far out of it in the Preakness. Did not happen. He pressed the pace. He seized the front end of the race, moved up very much earlier than I think most people expected him to. I really don't know what he's going to do in this Belmont Stakes. You could say he's going to do anything in terms of pace, and I would believe you, because this is a very random horse, and wasn't going to pick him, but I'm not going to depend on him to be able to be my long shot play in this race, because I really don't know what he's going to do. I could see him doing another thing down the backside, moving up toward the lead like he did in the Preakness and throwing off some other horses. I think that could be a bit of a threat for horses like Hot Rod Charlie and Rock Your World, who are going to be more forwardly placed. But in terms of win, don't see it at all. And in terms of a use underneath, I could see it if I had a definite idea of where he was going to run. But since I don't, I'm going to pass on him in here for everything.
And I will join you there, Jack. His 2 overseas runs have been very subpar. And he had an excuse in the UAE Derby, where he was 6, but he was kind of coming late after just, being all over the place in the early going. But the Preakness, he got excellent early positioning, needed to be where he needed to be, was just off that lead, which is kind of, he's a little bit in front of Ron Bauer, but, if anything, he probably got a better trip than Ron Bauer did. And he just sputtered out. Now, was that because it was his first time in the country off of, a minor break, all that shipping, all that time between that UAE Derby and Preakness getting to him, only being his 2nd run of the year? Will he improve with another start now in the U.S.? Those are valid questions. I just don't really know if it'll be the case for him. Seems overmatched. If this was a weaker race, maybe, but it's a tough bunch, especially at the top end. So I think France Godiina, pretty easy look against.
And now we're going to move on to the number 6 horse, Known Agenda. This is one of the second of 3 Todd Pletcher horses in this race, and probably the one that has the best chance to do the most running in here, but is a horse that I chose not to use, and that's because I'm looking for the longest priced Todd Pletcher horse in here. His runs pre-Kentucky Derby were not bad. Really good run, actually, in an allowance race in February. He won that by open lengths. Good win in the Florida Derby, but he also had some trouble in the Kentucky Derby, so you can't completely write him off as that was a bad race for him, because there were some problems. Again, another horse that got lost in the mountain of horses that had bad trips in the Kentucky Derby. Known Agenda was one of them, but at the same time, Known Agenda hasn't really jumped out that he's going to run the kind of race that I think he needs to run to win the Belmont Stakes. He's a good horse in my opinion. I think he has talent. I think he's a horse that is probably going to do his best running, though, toward the end of the year. I think the Vino Rosso comparisons are very accurate. You can debate on whether or not him or Vino Rosso was farther along at this respective points of their career, but I think both of them are going to be nice horses. Or Known Agenda is going to be a nice horse, like Vino Rosso was toward the later part of his career, but I think now is just, not that it's a little bit too much to ask, but I think now at this point, he doesn't have the talent to win this race. I think that there are horses that are better than him, but he will improve going forward, and I think that he's a horse that you could certainly use. You can make a case for him to win, absolutely. I like other horses in here, though, as I mentioned, with essential quality. I think I can depend on him more, and I think he's farther along than Known Agenda is.
And I think Known Agenda is a very talented horse. I really liked his 2 races at Gulfstream, but the Inside Post and the Derby was absolutely, I think, the biggest thing that really did him in. But he was still picking up late in the Derby, and he seemed like he still had plenty of run towards the end of that. And once again, kind of going back to a horse like Bourbonic, who was far back early on, the closers were not able to come in the Derby. Just did not set up for them too well on the first Saturday in May. So that's a gigantic excuse for Known Agenda. But his Florida Derby was an excellent win. Sure was against, not a very talented bunch, that's for sure, but visually very, very impressive. Ran some big numbers. And I think another big thing is he's kind of at home. I mean, sure, he hasn't spent too much time at Belmont throughout his career, but this is where Pletcher, knows how to really crank him up. And even then, Known Agenda's only run at Belmont was a very good second-place finish on debut. So he has track experience, which not a lot of horses in this race can really say. Only Bourbonic, the other Pletcher, has that going for him. Actually, the 3 Pletchers are the only horses in this race with Belmont experience. So he certainly has that going for him, and I think he has every chance in the world to improve off that Kentucky Derby effort. I think the distance is going to be really friendly to him. I don't know if he's going to get the right setup, which is probably going to be the biggest thing that deters me from putting him on top, but I think he's going to be coming late. Easily one I'd consider to pick up the minors.
And now we're going to move on to the number 7 horse, Rock Your World. This horse is, at least in my opinion, everybody's wise guy horse. He's coming out of the really, really atrocious trip in the Kentucky Derby, and that was absolutely why he lost the race. A lot of people are talking about how he has the opportunity to be able to run really well. And I will say about him, he is going to run better than he did in the Kentucky Derby. That is a given in here. Depending on whether or not that's a running in the top 4 or just running okay in this race is really remains to be seen. He is going to be, I think, the horse that is in front, but he's not lone speed in here. We talked about with Hot Rod Charlie, he's probably going to be relatively forwardly placed. I'll let Eric get into this, but the Kentucky Derby is very different from the Belmont Stakes. You don't see horses walking on the front end of the Belmont Stakes or being alone like you do in the Kentucky Derby, and I think that Rock Your World is not going to be able to get away with walking on the front end. He is going to have a Hot Rod Charlie close to him. I think he has a good chance to run well, but I wasn't able to depend on him being able to get the distance, and I think that there are a couple horses in here that are better than him, with Hot Rod Charlie also being a little bit of a factor in my decision. Hot Rod Charlie contesting Rock Your World is enough for me to say that he's not going to win this race.
And Rock Your World, I mean, in the Derby was over from the start. If you are looking at this horse, I mean, I know I did at least draw a line through that Kentucky Derby because he got brushed at the start. And Joel Rosario, I mean, it's hard to tell, but he really didn't have his foot in the iron for that first, I'd say 100, 150 yards. You can see him watching certain head-on angles, him still fiddling with that iron, trying to put his foot back in the stirrup. So he clearly had his excuses in the Derby. That being said, can you take those first 3 career races and say this is a Belmont winner? I don't think so. I really, admire what this horse has done so far in his career because it's been impressive. He's been visually very, very strong, but that Santa Anita Derby field was not, incredibly deep. Medina Spirit, sure, as we record this, is the Kentucky Derby winner, but we all know what's going on there. And then Dream Shake certainly has proven he's probably more of a one-turn horse. And then from there, from the 4th place finisher defunded to the last place finisher, there was nobody in there, nobody of graded stakes caliber. So how do you really take that as he takes the step up? For me, I didn't like him a lot heading into the Kentucky Derby, so I can't, take that Kentucky Derby experience or even the race before that, and say, yeah, I'm going to pick him over an Essential Quality or a Hot Rod Charlie. I echo the sentiments of Jack. I don't think he's going to be alone on the lead like some do, mainly because these are world-class riders. These are the best in the country, some of the best in the world, and they are not dumb enough, plain and simple, to let a horse go alone on the lead in a race as prestigious as the Belmont Stakes. Flavien Prat especially. We know how crafty this guy can ride. We know what he's done over the past month, really, with some of his rides, especially at Churchill Downs. Derby weekend, we saw it at Pimlico in the Preakness mainly, but some other good undercard rides. He's not going to let anybody get away with a lone lead. He knows how to ration out the speed of his horse to not take him out, but also apply the pressure on that speed. So that's why I don't really think they'll let him go. Same with Louis Sides. He's one of the best speed riders in the game. He's got a great mental clock. You just know it. So I don't think Essential Quality is going to be too far off from a challenging Rocky World. Last point with this horse as well, I just don't know if he's going to get the 1.5 miles. I know he has kind of the pedigree to do it, but looking at him physically, definitely probably more of a miler, 1 1/8 horse, another horse, kind of like Hot Rod Charlie. I think they could probably get the 1.25 miles, but I think that's probably their cap. And even then, in Sire Candy Ride, you don't often see Candy Rides loving the distance. A certain handful have ended up getting 1.25 miles, most notably, likes of Gun Runner, Shared Belief. Misremembered was probably the first of his to get the 10 furlongs, but you knew that was probably their upper limit because they were not exactly finishing strongly in those 1.25 mile races. So distance definitely the biggest thing for Rocky World. Don't think he's lone speed, and don't love his resume enough to put him over the top in this spot.
And now we're going to move on to the final horse in this race, the longest priced Todd Pletcher horse on the board, which is Overtook, a horse who really, in my mind, has no reason for me to think he has a chance or for me to be using him in this race, but I am going to be using him, and that's for one simple reason: is you always have to have a Todd Pletcher horse somewhere in the Belmont. When he runs horses in the Belmont, one of them usually does run good, and in a race where I don't really like too many of the horses underneath the horse I picked, I don't see much, and I don't want to say that Overtook is on the level of horses like Rocky World or Hot Rod Charlie, but I don't see it impossible for Overtook to be able to run a race and pick off tired horses late, like many notable Todd Pletcher horses have done in Belmont Stakes in the past, including two of his winners, Taprit and Palace Malice. And that's what I'm banking on, is the fact that he is going to have the opportunity to pass some tired horses late, and he is going to be a relatively large price because he doesn't have anything in the past performances that indicate that he's going to be able to win this race. I feel like I'm grasping at straws here, but I'm okay with doing it because he is going to be my second place pick in this race and not my top pick. Really, that's it. I think that he can pass some tired horses late, and he is going to be the longest price of the three Todd Pletcher horses, so I like that, and could possibly even be the longest price on the board. So purely a value play, purely hoping he can pass some tired horses late. Don't actually think he can win, and if you're betting this race, trying to have the best bets, Overtook is not that horse, but he, in my opinion, if certain things go right, it could happen.
Totally, and I mean, you just have to go back a couple years to 2019 with another Mark Casse horse. I know we mentioned War of Will earlier. Sir Winston had a kind of similar resume that Overtook has heading into this race, with a performance in the Peter Pan that didn't really, initially blow you away, but then you're like, this horse is going to love 1.5 miles. And he has, all the elements of that with the pedigree, especially to suggest that. That being said, Sir Winston's Belmont was very weak, and this Belmont not so much. So I think that's where I would definitely look against him as a win contender. But I think Jack has fair points. Using him underneath with the idea he's of this Belmont group. If Essential Quality is not the one that's going to love the distance the most, then it is Overtook. So he does have that going for him. I will say, though, he is adding blinkers here. I think a lot of people immediately turn to something like blinkers on as a method that will improve a horse immensely. But don't forget, this horse did wear blinkers in his first two races, was beaten a combined 29 lengths. I don't know if the blinkers were really the problem for that, but his best 3 career races have come without them. So that is something to keep an eye on when you're handicapping this one. Overtook's a nice horse. He has the ability to run all day. That's for sure. We saw that throughout the winter and spring in the Peter Pan, but is it enough to beat these horses? Probably not. But I do think, like I said, Jack has a good point in using him to finish out any exactas or trifectas, or even just some show money for him.
And now we'll get into our picks for this race. We've kind of bounced them around the entire episode, so we're not going to waste too much time with it. For my win pick is Essential Quality. For second, as I already mentioned, Overtook. And for third, I'm going to throw in Hot Rod Charlie just because he is a fighter. We saw him fight in the Breeders' Cup. We saw him fight in the Bob Lewis. And we saw him fight in the Kentucky Derby. So I think he's going to be there late. And I don't want to say this because it could probably end up being wrong, but I think that he has a better chance to hold on late than Rock Your World does, because I haven't seen Rock Your World have to fight another horse off, but I have seen Hot Rod Charlie be able to fight another horse off. So I think Hot Rod Charlie could hold on to it late, but that's my top three for this race.
And for me, no real surprises anywhere. I am going to be on the morning line favorite in Essential Quality, likely post time favorite. Here's what I'll say though. I know Essential Quality is 2-1 morning line, but I'm confident you will not get any lower than that. This horse will not be going off any lower than 2-1 because plenty of people will be hammering Rock Your World and Hot Rod Charlie. So 2-1's the lowest he'll go. If anything, though, if he does go off favored, which he likely will, I think we're going to see it closer to a 5-2 or 3-1. So the value's still going to be there if you want to play him on top. I don't think he's going to be a heavy favorite in this year's Belmont. So that is the one benefit, I think, in picking a favorite in this spot. And then for second, Known Agenda. Third, I'll go Hot Rod Charlie. Like I said, no real surprises. I don't love a lot of these horses getting the distance, and then even the ones that can get the distance, I just don't know if they have the talent. So I go with the two surefires, I think, to get the 1.5 miles, and then Hot Rod Charlie. Jack mentioned those battling qualities that he has. Loves to deal with other horses around him. So I think he'll be gritty enough to pick up third.
And with that being mentioned, that's it for this preview. We will have tons of more previews for the races this weekend at Belmont Park. Some spectacular races. We'll get into a lot of them on YouTube. Check those out. Also, I did leave a link in the description. I did make a Belmont Stakes montage of all the Belmont Stakes from 1968 all the way up through 2020. That playlist will be in the description. It is in 2 videos, so you'll have to click the playlist where the 2 videos are. So definitely check that out if you want to get into the Belmont mood with some old Belmonts. And aside from that, that's it for this episode. We'll see you next time for our Belmont recap this weekend. Hopefully it works out similar to the way that the Preakness worked out for us. We'll see you then. Have a good one.
And they've opened up by 7 lengths off the turn to Hidden Stash, who swings wide in third. Here comes Essential Quality now, taking aim once again at Highly Motivated, who still has the lead coming into the final furlong of the Toyota Bluegrass. Highly Motivated with the advantage. Essential Quality is still driving at him from the outside past the 16th pole. Highly Motivated, Essential Quality, what a finish! The champ remains